It was indeed a sunny day today. The surface of the river was quite calm and quiet. A few days earlier, wind would blow up light waves that washed against the shore. However, there was no such scene today, for there was no wind at all. It's too calm, weirdly calm. The water was the opposite of clear. At the shore it was fine, but a meter away from the shore where the water was deeper, no one could see the situation down there. In such a dangerous world where no common sense could be applied to, even the slightest detailed risk could not be ignored or underestimated. Ignorance led to death. For what's worse, just like the Black Swamp, the river was originally regarded as a high-risk zone by people in the tribe. All the fishing in the past few days did not mean that it was safe. Seeing Xiao Xuan acted like that, all the kids got puzzled, but still they stopped what they were doing and stepped backwards, even though 1 minute earlier they were very excited. Yes, they were voracious and no one would describe them as smart kids. But they were not stupid and every one of them cherished their lives. Also, Xiao Xuan had earned their trust after all these days' leadership, so they all stared at Xiao Xuan for his further command after they stepped back. Xiao Xuan stood at the bank, thinking as he looked at the quiet waters. The surface was still calm, and aside from that, it was just like another normal day. The water did not change its color and nothing suspicious could be observed. Was he just being paranoid? Suddenly, some white translucent creatures appeared in front of Xiao Xuan. They were similar to some upside-down shuttlecocks with lots of whisker-like tentacles. And they move as the tentacles swayed. Judging from former experiences, Xiao Xuan learned that such circumstances do not appear for no reason. There should be that kind of creatures in the water, and they are supposed to be very dangerous. Xiao Xuan grasped a straw rope with a stone worm tied on its end, and tossed it into the river. It dropped at a spot that was less than 2 meters away from the bank. However, from the other end of the straw rope he held in his hands, Xiao Xuan did not sense any intense struggle like a piranha taking the bait. The black float was vibrating gently. One would assume that it came from the stone worm's struggle if not observing carefully. But Xiao Xuan was very familiar with the stone worm's struggle beneath the water since he had quite some experiences in fishing. The truth now was that the vibration amplitude of the black float on the surface was slightly smaller than before, and it had a trend of getting smaller and smaller. Xiao Xuan pulled back the straw rope, and every whelp got around together as the stone worm revealed itself. The stone worm did not get bitten, but its whole body turned pale. It shrank to some extent and remained the stiff, twisted posture as it was dropped into the water. Placing the changed stone worm on the ground, Xiao Xuan used the back of his stone knife to strike on its body. Click. After a slight sharp snap, the stone worm was broken into pieces as if it was made of glass. It had no more the soft body as before. All the whelps standing aside began to feel extreme terror. Would a person turn dry and crisp if he were in the river? No one dared to try, and they moved away without the slightest intention to touch the water. Xiao Xuan tossed another few stone worms down the water, and every time it was the same result. Only after a few seconds, a lively stone worm would become a crisp dried worm, and no fish would take the bait no matter how long it had been placed in the water. Either the fish have no interest in dried worms, or there is no fish nearby at all. Perhaps all the fish has run away since something dreadful is in the water. I guess they will only return after that kind of creature leaves. Xiao Xuan took back the straw rope and analyzed. Then, when will the fish return? Asked a kid. Now kids from the cave did not fear that ferocious-looking piranhas. Instead, they looked forward seeing them, and piranhas were missed dearly even with only 1 day's absence. Not sure. We'll come back and check tomorrow. Xiao Xuan shook his head and he even went to the guarding warriors and explained the situation to warn them that they should pay extra attention to keep people in the tribe from going into the river. Also, he left a dried stone worm so that they could review on it. Let's go back. We shall weave more straw rope for next time's fishing. Xiao Xuan advised. The consumption of straw rope was quite large, for normal straw rope had bad quality so it would break only after a few times fishing. Since they could not go fishing today, Xiao Xuan asked them to collect enough grass and sit in the cave to weave straw ropes. Even though seeing that dried stone worm made the kids terrified, their hearts were filled more with reluctance and unwillingness. How many fish could they have captured if it were just another fishing day today? At least 4. They could have gotten more if Caesar had dug out more stone worms. For the sake of their own lives, fishing was no longer an option for today. According to Xuan's words, they should come back and check tomorrow. But what if tomorrow was no different than today? And what would happen the day after tomorrow? Then what would happen ever after? What if they could never go fishing? It was too scary to even think about it. The children in the cave were anxious, and their minds were wandering even when they were physically weaving straw ropes in the cave. Xiao Xuan sat at the entrance of the cave, rethinking about the creature he saw earlier as he bathed himself in the sunlight. Incidentally, he would think about the coming winter. That day, many people got driven back by the guarding warriors when they tried to go fishing at the river. A few days earlier, residents in Mountain Foot area noticed that the children in Orphan Cave became diligent. In the past, they would simply sleep, eat, and occasionally go rob some things. However, now every day they went out and they would only return from the riverside in the afternoons when food was supposed to be distributed. Also, every time when they returned, they had dragged back some arm-length fish with a giant head and numerous mouthful sharp tiny teeth, tied with straw rope. Men with curiosity followed them and wanted to learn the skills of fishing. However, first of all, it was difficult for them to dig out stone worms, and with the lack of alternative bait, it was pretty hard for them to capture a fish with merely a straw rope. Secondly, even if they had dug out stone worms, or they had used some other things as bait, it was still difficult for them to capture a fish as easily as Xiao Xuan and his companions. Sometimes, the things they fished out were alien and strange and one could get his body swollen like a ham with a single touch. Finally, those men noticed that Xiao Xuan was using some black thing that could float above the water surface, and that black float was the only thing that Xiao Xuan had yet they didn't possess. Indeed, the harvest was not ideal when one did not use that equipment. Xiao Xuan had actually analyzed why that happened. Those piranhas probably didn't like to live in the bottom of the river, while the straw rope with a bait tended to sink under the water. Stone worms, on the other hand, would easily flee once they touched dirt and rocks from the bottom. Those two factors added up to the result of a bad harvest. These days, Xiao Xuan asked Caesar to catch more of those worms from the black swamp, and obtained more black floats. He used them to trade for some meat and animal skins. The meat was not much and he shared it with kids in the cave the day he got it back. As for the animal skins, although it was not fine in the quality, it could absolutely make the coming winter less harsh for them. Because of that, aside from the kids from the cave, the residents in the Mountain Foot district who had no hunting missions were also fishing tirelessly. No one would complain for too much food. Winter was coming and man could only feel at ease when he had enough food stored. However, everyone was disappointed today. Xiao Xuan sighed at another group of people returning from the riverside, upset and unsatisfied. Unexpectedly, Caesar, who was lying beside, suddenly stood up and stared at one direction. Xiao Xuan looked at that direction. About 20 meters away from the entrance of the cave, there were some giant stones. Normally, if the weather was fine, kids would lie there and bath in the sunlight. However, now few would go because they were kept busy all day long. At this time, no one was supposed to be on the stones, but Xiao Xuan observed that someone was there, for a little bit of animal skin was exposed at the edge of it. Even based on the little part of animal skin, Xiao Xuan had recognized that it was Sai, who used to rob away Xiao Xuan's things and once got beaten up by Xiao Xuan at the training ground. Usually Yi and Jan would follow Sai everywhere, they also came today. The day before yesterday when Xiao Xuan was taking Caesar to catch worms in the black swamp, these three kids blocked Xiao Xuan at the gravel yard to rob him of the black floats. They fought, but at that time, kids from the cave also came, so Sai and his companions quickly ran away. Perhaps the three of them did not give up and they thought they could steal something in here. They dared not rob the fish because there was a clear rule in the tribe that no one should take the food in Orphan Cave. However, the fishing equipment did not belong to the food category. Xiao Xuan touched his jaw. He tapped on Caesar and told him to wait, while he turned around and entered the cave. "Hey, you all!" Xiao Xuan shouted out at the kids in the cave, "Lately you have all behaved pretty well, and we captured lots of fish, which is good. If the situation continues, we will not suffer from starvation this winter, with all the food from the tribe. But, what shall we do if now someone wants to come down here and rob our things?" The eyes of the kids were lit up when they heard Xiao Xuan's voice, for they thought it was time to go fishing. However, when they realized it was not about fishing, the enthusiasm quickly cooled down. But, all emotions were replaced by anger when they understood what Xiao Xuan was implying. Rob things. Beat them up. No fish and they only want to rob the fishing equipment. That's also a no. What's the meaning of steal? Oh, you say that taking without informing is called steal. That's basically the same as rob. Beat them up hard. Xiao Xuan had said before that to those little whelps, eat must be the most beautiful word in the world. Food is the specific interpretation of that word. They would fight with full spirit with whoever that wanted to rob away their food. Taking their food equal to taking their most treasured thing. At that time, Sai with his two minions were just discussing how they planned to take some black floats when no one was watching and then leave quietly. The discussion was heating up when Caesar jumped down out of nowhere and pounced on them. It was so sudden that these three could only jump away out of reflex, quite terrified. Say's heart raced with the shock as he stared at Caesar with a stick tightly held in his hands. He was still afraid, but he decided to swing the stick as long as the wolf took one step forward. Thinking too attentively, Sai did not notice the surroundings until Yi and Jan poked at him. "What are you poking for? Didn't you see me?" Sai turned and roared, but before he could finish his words, he finally looked along Yi and Zan's sights and saw those dozens of whelps standing at the entrance of the cave, with sticks and rocks in their hands and fierce anger flashing in their eyes. Sai and his two minions did not manage to steal anything, but instead were chased after by 24 kids from the cave, like rats on the street. In that afternoon, almost every resident in the Mountain Foot district saw the surprising scene. After all, normally Sai, together with Jan and Yi, was the one who bullied other kids. And in the past, kids from the orphan cave would not be so united. They usually acted alone, and no less than half of them got beaten up by Sai before. However, now no one expected them to be so united. Over 20 kids ran after Sai and his minions' tails. After just a short period of time, Sai and his minions were beaten up hard. They would have suffered even more if it weren't for the fact that their parents came to their rescue. That particular incident also helped the people in the Mountain Foot district refresh their understanding towards the kids in the cave. It turned out that these children knew how to be united against a common enemy. Some people with evil thoughts also had to hide their thoughts seeing those circumstances. Fighting was nothing. Kids in the tribe feared not fighting, and no adult treated it seriously. However, it was totally a different story when someone got besieged by 20 people, even when all of them were merely children. Only the idiots would try to find trouble for themselves. After taking care of Say's disturbance, Xiaoxuan gathered the ferocious kids back to the cave. With the chasing and fighting earlier, their unwilling emotions got vented all out. So naturally they should come back and do the right things. Kids in the cave saw that Xiaoxuan used his fish to trade for animal skins, so they took their fish and asked Xiaoxuan to do the trading for them. The group leaders that Xiaoxuan appointed were not fools, and since they themselves did not like to communicate with other people in the tribe, they asked Xiaoxuan to do the favor. In the memories of some kids, they vaguely remembered that someone had taught them two things that should be prepared and stored before winter came. One was food, and the other was animal skins. The former one could save them from starvation, and the latter one guaranteed that they won't be frozen to death. Even though the tribe would spare them some animal skins for winter use, there were also kids that got ill because of the weather every year. Before they were properly treated, they tended to close their eyes for good and thus surrender their lives to the harsh winter. Those who had lived for a few years in the cave still had fresh memories of winter times. It was so terrifying, for no one had sufficient food, and at nights they often woke up because of the coldness. Let alone the fact that their companions could end up dead whenever. So since they had food now, they would gladly spare some food and trade for animal skins. When one kid tried to ask Xiaoxuan's favor, the other followed. Xiaoxuan recorded on the stone wall that which group had spared how many fish, and after he traded the animal skins back, he would distribute them to different groups accordingly. As he was writing on the wall, someone came inside the cave. Everyone hesitated and held their breath, seeing that someone walked in. Then every 5 of them gathered together and stared at the coming person vigilantly. Xiaoxuan knew the coming person, as he was just another kid living in the cave named Moer. Moer's father was an excellent warrior, but he had an accident during a hunting mission. After that, Moer's mother remarried, and Moer should have joined the new family according to the rules in the tribe. However, the newly formed family had more than one kid, and since there were inevitable conflicts, fighting and violence were unavoidable. Originally Moer was named as but since his father's name was Mo, he himself combined the 2 words and gave himself a new name. Moer carried a long stone knife that was nearly his height and scanned around the cave. He sniffed and looked up curiously, only to find out that many fish with tiny sharp teeth were hanging above and stared at him with their dark red eyes. Moer suddenly stepped back, stiffened his body as he drew out the stone knife that he had tied on his back. At the same time Moer drew out his knife, some kids misunderstood him and thought that he was trying to rob away their fish, so they also stood up abruptly with tools tightly grasped in their hands, staring at Moer with all their attention. "What? Want to rob our fish?" Although they lived in the same cave, ever since Xiaoxuan had divided them into different groups of 5, in their hearts, anyone who did not belong to their group was considered as an outsider, against whom needed to be guarded. "All right. Drop all your knives and sticks, the one with the stone, don't you dare think that I did not see the weapon in your hand behind your back. Drop them all." Xiaoxuan roared at all kids in the cave, and then walked towards Moer. He pointed at the fish above and explained, "Dead." Moer frowned and observed carefully at the fish with giant mouth and numerous sharp teeth. He held back his knife only after he made sure that they were dead fish with no ability to threaten his safety. It was also pretty hard for him to hold such a big knife. After he took it back, Mower glanced at the surroundings again. Seeing that, Xiaoxuan assumed that he was looking for Ku. Ku has gone to the mountainside district, and he won't come back for the winter. Uncle Ji named me as the person in charge in the cave. Mower nodded and said nothing. For him it didn't matter who was in charge of the cave, it was just that the changes made him uncomfortable. Carrying his knife, Mower headed to the depth of the cave. Unlike the old times, everyone in the cave stared at him as he walked, and sending a message that he was not welcome. In the past, no one would care whether he returned or not after some time's absence. They would just lie on the ground in a mess. Just as Mower wondered in private why these changes were happening since last time he left, the other kids were thinking as well. In the past they didn't bother to think, but now they were quite eager to think. Another person meant that more gain needed to be distributed, which was such a shame. Everyone had their own thoughts and spontaneously they glanced at Xiaoxuan, waiting for his decision. Xiaoxuan had heard from Ku earlier that Mower's father had left him many good stuff. The stone knife that Mower was using was inherited from his father. So compared to the other kids in the cave, Mower was basically born with a silver spoon in his mouth. However, the second-generation Rich was unlike the others, as he would constantly come back to the cave instead of living a fine life in the mountains. Sometimes, his remarried mother had to drag him away from the cave and head back to their home in the mountain. However, after some time, Mower would return to the cave again. Perhaps he fought with the other kids in his new family, and perhaps for other reasons, he often came back. But no one asked him why, and Mower had not told anyone about his life story. He was scanty with his words, and very reticent. When communicating with others, he would merely nod or shake his head, or else come directly to fight. He struck the other kids in the cave with only one impression, that he was quite a master in fighting. No one had beaten him up, including Ku, who had already gone to the mountainside district. So less than a last resort, no one in the cave would try to rob Mower. Naturally one shall only rob things from the weakest person, and those with muddled brains that tried to rob Mower had all been stabbed by him. "Are you staying in the cave for the winter?" asked Xiaoxuan. Mower nodded. "Good. Formerly there were 25 people in the cave and I divided them into 5 groups. Now since you are back." The air was tense in the cave and everyone stared at Xiaoxuan with their eyes wide open. Some would even harshly shake their heads towards Xiaoxuan as if they were afraid that Xiaoxuan would misinterpret their meaning, that they did not want any new members in their group. "So you should join our group," said Xiaoxuan. Kids in the other 4 groups were quite relieved, and their intense expressions faded away and were replaced with joyful smiles. As for the 2 older kids in Xiaoxuan's group, they were not happy about it, but since Xiaoxuan had made the decision, they chose not to violate it. However, they glared at Mower and turned around to continue weaving straw rope. Mower did not care for the others' obvious exclusion, at least Xiaoxuan could not see his resistance based on his reaction. He was still in deep silence as before. At night, some kids already fell asleep, and some kids who were worried that tomorrow might be yet another bad day for fishing and couldn't sleep, weaved straw ropes mindlessly. It was so messy, they would weave and then undo the straw rope again and again. When they got angry, they would use their teeth to bite the straw rope, which made Xiaoxuan quite anxious. "How are we going to use these crappy ropes that were already bitten through?" The fire near the entrance had not been put out, and the curtain at the entrance was still up. The firelight was pretty obvious since it was already dark in the outside. So the night swallows would avoid the bright places and only observe from afar. Mower carried his knife and approached the entrance. He put the giant knife on his back aside, and held 2 short knives with both his hands. He gripped the short knives backhanded, and since he could not hide his breath like totemic warriors, the flying night swallows noticed his presence as soon as he walked out the entrance. Xiaoxuan sat beside the fire. It was not far from the entrance and the sky could be observed from there. 2 crescent moons were floating in the sky. Yes, 2 of them. When seeing the moons in the sky at night, Xiaoxuan realized this could only be explained by this being a whole other world, which was far different from the world he knew. All the rules and experiences he once mastered could not be applied in here. During the season, 2 moons would march against each other in opposite directions. The crescents could not provide enough light to the dark sky, so it was darker than before. The night grew darker and darker, and winter would officially begin when these 2 moons fully disappeared. Xiaoxuan's eyesight fell on Mower's body as Mower left the cave. Judging from his earlier behavior and the way he held those knives now, Xiaoxuan could tell that Mower was quite experienced in fighting. Every day when the other kids were sleeping, he would start to practice with his knives. Even though his father was gone, there was still someone who was willing to teach him. Holding the short knives, Mower stood there in silence, as if he was staring blankly at the darkness. But Xiaoxuan knew that Mower was waiting for the game to approach him. In the darkness, night swallows flew by at a very fast speed. One could not see their bodies clearly and only slight sounds could be captured. There were a lot of night swallows outside the cave, and they were hesitating because there was light coming from the cave. Only a few of them dared to rush at Mower. A quick small sound was heard. Night swallows were approaching. Mower moved fast and he slashed his short knife to the left rapidly. It was a quick slash without hesitation. Ding! He missed. The second that the knife cut on the wall, there was a flashing sparkle, because he was standing quite near the entrance. The night swallow that attacked earlier had left, but it left a half-hand-long wound on Mower's arm. It was caused by the night swallow's shovel-like beak. But influenced by the coming knife, the night swallow slightly altered its attacking angle, so the wound it left on Mower's arm was not deep. If the peck was in the front, Mower would have lost some flesh, instead of just getting a superficial wound. A fine hunter needed to know how to hide and how to endure. Mower did not reveal any painful expressions at the wound earlier, and he did not frown even a bit. His hand holding the knife was still steady and he looked just the same as before. He did not treat his wound, and just let the blood bleed from his wound. However, the flying night swallow seemed to sense the blood in the air and began to act restless. Xiaoxuan could hear the sounds of more night swallows flying in the air. Compared with the other kids in the cave, Mower was much tougher. In the past, Ku was very incomprehensive towards Mower using night swallows to practice his knife skills. In the eyes of the kids in the cave, he was totally asking for death himself. When Mower was not in the cave, they whispered and wondered about why he would try so hard in such a tough place when he could have a far better and easier life. Caesar was also provoked by those flying night swallows outside the cave. Xiaoxuan calmed him down and stood up to lead him to the depth of the cave. However, just after a few steps, Xiaoxuan stopped, for he heard some sharp humming. At first Xiaoxuan thought they were imaginary voices, and then he wondered if it was tinnitus caused by too much thinking or other reasons. But after a while, he felt that something was wrong. The sharp humming grew stronger and stronger, as if the thing who created the sound was approaching. Ding! Another sound caused by a stone knife and stone walls hitting, and at the same time, the sharp humming that Xiaoxuan heard stopped. Xiaoxuan looked at the other side. Mower held a knife in his hand, and the knife had already poked through a night swallow's body. The night swallow finally rested after some waves of its wings, and its blood streamed down the gray stone knife. The approaching night swallows turned and flew afar as they were lingering in the air. Mower flung the knife and the dead night swallow was tossed into the cave beside the giant knife that Mower carried in his back. Then he continued to wait for another game. Caesar bared his teeth to that dead night swallow, and he was very anxious to take a bite at it. However, Xiaoxuan stared at the shovel-like beak of that night swallow, lost in thought. Early in the next morning, before the sun rose, all kids in the cave woke up, and some of them had dark circles around their eyes for not getting proper sleep because of anxiety. Mower was curious when he got woken up, for that circumstance never happened in the past. He had killed a few night swallows during last night's practice, and on his arm there were also a few wounds with different depth. He had covered them with herbs. Regardless of his curiosity, Mower stood up and picked up his stone knife and waited for what was next. He found out that every 5 kids would stand close to each other, with straw ropes and little black things in their arms. They were discussing about something near the entrance as they constantly looked at Xiaoxuan, fully excited. The sun rose. "Today's weather must be good, so we can go fishing," said a child, staring at the sun in the sky. "But the weather was also good yesterday, yet we could not catch any fish. Will today be the same as yesterday?" Another child poured cold water on his enthusiasm. Most kids in the cave were no fans of unlucky words like that, so they all glared at the one who had claimed the same as yesterday. Regardless of whether today was a day for fishing, they needed to eat breakfast, or else they would have no strength to work. Ever since they had some income, Xiaoxuan would eat something every morning. At first, some kids felt reluctant to eat, but then they behaved tired and cranky when it came to fishing, so their harvest was not as good as the others who had eaten. So the next morning, they would set up their stone pot, just as Xiaoxuan did. They had no choice but to eat breakfast, for no eating meant no strength to work, and no strength to work meant even less game, which would lead to starvation. It was just a vicious cycle. They were quite energetic when they were well fed and watered. Seeing that Mower did not have any trouble walking around, Xiaoxuan invited him to go fishing together. Moer offered the night swallows he killed last night as breakfast for the group, so the other kids besides Xiaoxuan had also softened their attitude towards him. All kids left the cave, leaving their home unguarded, because there was nothing left for others to steal. They carried all the straw ropes and black floats. As for fish, no one from the tribe would try to steal the food from the orphan cave, or else he or she would be truly despised. So no one would take their fish even if they put them outside to dry. Besides the food, there was nothing in the cave that could entice others. So it was totally unnecessary to keep it guarded, and Caesar followed Xiaoxuan as well. The surface of the river was also calm today, but not as weirdly calm as yesterday. Seeing the glittering waters, Xiaoxuan felt relieved a little. He called for Ba and Tu to take up a straw rope with a stone worm tied on the end, and tossed it into the water as an experiment. Over 20 kids were standing behind Xiaoxuan and they stared at the stone worm without blinking. When the stone worm sank into the water, they stared at the black float on the surface. "How's it going, Xuan? Is it okay? Has the fish returned?" Some hot-tempered kids couldn't help but whisper. Xiaoxuan fixed his eyes on the surface, and this time he did not see those water creatures with the long tentacles. Also the black float's vibration was just like old times, which represented that stone worm was struggling down there. There should be no prob. Before Xiaoxuan could finish his words, he was interrupted by the situation on the water surface. The black float sank suddenly and they could feel the familiar strength from the straw rope. Xiaoxuan calmed his mind and promptly pulled the straw rope back together with Ba. "Fish. It's fish." The fish returned. Seeing that, all kids jumped up and down in excitement, and when the familiar hideous face exposed itself from the water, the kids finally rested assured completely. It was only one day, but they missed it dearly. They were quite eager with straw ropes at hand, and at Xiaoxuan's command, all the whelps began to fish expertly with their group members. "Moer, you stay with them? 2. Tell Moer the things that he needs to know when fishing, while I take Caesar to dig out more stone worms. The stone worms we have now are far from enough. But remember, no should enter the water and no fighting. If you have the time to fight, you may as well pull out more fish. Take your time, for winter will come in a few days. Go seek help from the guarding warriors if anything's wrong." The latter part of Xiaoxuan's words were spoken to all the kids at the bank. In fact, Xiaoxuan didn't need to say that much, for all the kids cherished today's chance of fishing very much after yesterday's incident. No one knew whether those fish would leave tomorrow, so the more they captured, the better. Who would bother to fight one another? Just at the same time when the kids from the cave were pulling out fish from the water, some residents in Mountain Foot District also came and joined the army of fishers. Those situations were seen often lately, and unlike old times, guarding warriors would not go and warn them if they saw someone go near the waters. Now they would only observe from afar, and from time to time they would remind them not to go down the water, and that they should report on time if they notice anything unusual. These fish had indeed helped solve the pressing needs of some people. In a few families, the totemic warriors were wounded in recent hunting missions, so they could not participate in the last hunting before winter. No hunting led to less food. All family members shared the same trouble as how to survive the cold. However, now they were pretty relieved, for who could have anticipated that the things in the river could be captured so easily? Even the weak and the old people in the tribe could come and help. Also, through all the things, Xiaoxuan was gradually known by the residents in Mountain Foot District. In the past all they remembered was that a kid was wandering around with a wolf. Now because of fish and their trade with him for black floats, they finally remembered Xiaoxuan's name. When the word that Xiaoxuan was planning to trade for all standards of animal skins got around, many families cleared out some spare animal skins that they wouldn't be using, and rushed to do trading with Xiaoxuan. When Xiaoxuan arrived at the gravel yard, there were already 7 or 8 people there. They even greeted Xiaoxuan, and after they heard that today was a day for fishing, their eyesight on him grew much warmer. How they wished that they could find the stone worms' hideout, and take them all as fishing baits as soon as possible. Recently, the stone worms in the gravel yard were all in trouble. As soon as they revealed their head a little from the gravels, people would rush forward and dig them out. The quick ones could cut itself into half to survive, and the slow ones could only be dragged out as a whole. In the previous years, they would get no one's attention even if they creeped above the ground slowly. However, now it was totally different. Aside from revealing their heads, even a slight move of gravels would draw someone's attention, and people would turn the gravels over to see if there are any stone worms hidden inside. But, compared with Caesar, these people were far from efficient. He was very coveted when people in the gravel yard searching for stone worms saw that Caesar could easily dig one out with a bit of sniffing. This wolf had such a FC King sharp nose. Also, one would think that perhaps they could weave a giant net with the straw ropes and use that to capture the fish. However, the truth proved different. Indeed, one could capture many fish with a net, but before the net was pulled up, it was torn apart by those fish. And there was no fish left when one collected the net back. Thus everyone had no alternative but to use the inconvenient way to go fishing and capture their game one at a time. In the afternoon, all the kids were summoned back in their cave by Xiaoxuan. After they had been fed with the food provided by the tribe, no one wanted to stay in the cave to weave straw ropes. Because after yesterday's hard work, they now had enough straw ropes. Instead, they wanted to go back to the riverside and continue fishing before it got dark. Xiaoxuan raised no objection, but he did not tag along in the afternoon. He got plenty of stone worms in the morning, so it should be enough for 5 groups. Judging from the moons last night, winter should be just around the corner. They have to capture more fish before winter comes, for as long as winter came, the temperature in the outside would rapidly drop and there would be thick ice along the bank. And then, people with no totemic power would basically always stay inside. They had no strong or thick animal fur clothes to fight against the blizzard, so they could easily get frozen to death. Instead of following those kids to the riverbank, Xiaoxuan took 2 fish and left the cave. Xiaoxuan dragged 1 fish and gave the other fish to Caesar. He also took an animal skin bag with him, in which there were the stones of fine quality that he had collected from the training ground earlier. Since there were more people searching for stone worms in the gravel yard, it was not safe as a hiding place anymore. Xiaoxuan moved those stones and kept them in the cave. Unlike old times, no elk dared to rob Xiaoxuan's stuff anymore. Every time when Xiaoxuan had found fine stones that could be made into tools, he would trade them for food with a stoneware crafter. Also, the man he chose to do trading with was also fixed. Xiaoxuan made the decision after he had observed a few stoneware crafters in the Mountain Foot district. The stoneware crafter was named K. People said that he was in charge of placing traps back in the hunting team. It's just that during a hunting mission, he lost one of his legs, so he had to retire from the hunting team and become a stoneware crafter near the Mountain Foot district. And now he made stoneware for people to earn a living. Xiaoxuan took the fish and came in front of a wooden house. There were no doors in many houses, as people used thick leather curtains or plant-woven curtains to block others' views. It was also the case with Key's house. Xiaoxuan called out, "Uncle K," as he could hear sounds of polishing the stoneware in the house. No one answered inside, but the leather curtain moved a little bit, which meant that the owner allowed you to come inside. Without permission to enter, Xiaoxuan would never be able to lift the curtain. Many things that Ku seemed quite simple, but were in fact very much complicated than the things in other residents' houses. You can directly lift other people's curtains, but it won't work in Key's house. You would definitely be the one who suffered if you tried to enter by force. Even though he had only 1 leg left now, Kay was in charge of placing traps back in the hunting team. So for what it was worth, he still had his skills. Xiaoxuan lifted the curtain and walked inside, followed by Caesar. However, Caesar dared not relax or bump into anything. Last time when he sniffed on something that he was curious about, he got clamped on his nose once he accidentally touched it. Even with all his efforts, he could not tear it off with his paws. Instead, the more he struggled, the tighter the clamp became. Even though Xiaoxuan came to his rescue soon and helped him remove the clamp, it hurt like hell for days. Ever since then, Caesar would always behave well when he followed Xiaoxuan in here. And he would only stay with Xiaoxuan with no extra curiosity. Key's house was relatively larger than the others and was around 100 square meters. In the room there were different kinds of stoneware, from daily use stone cups and bowls, to hunting tools such as stone knives and spearheads. Also the tools were in different materials. Some of them were made from buckhorns or animal bones, and some were made from ordinary stones only. However, most of the tools were combinations of the former 2 materials as composite-type tools. The warriors in the tribe used mostly the composite-type ones. After glancing at the tools hanging on the wall, Xiaoxuan looked away and went straight into the small room that Kay used to polish his stoneware. Gray-haired old Kay sat there still. Because he dealt with stones all day long, so all his animal skin clothes were covered with a layer of white stone powder. His hands, that he was using to hold the stoneware, now were stained with a layer of gray. Kay fixed his eyes on the stoneware which he was still working on, and did not move his eyesight because of Xiaoxuan's entry, as if the whole world had disappeared besides the stoneware in his hands. Knowing Key's character, Xiaoxuan directly took out his animal skin bag and fetched those 2 stones as he handed them to Kay. "Uncle Kay, could you please help me make 2 stone knives or daggers?" The stones Xiaoxuan took out could merely be made into short knives or daggers because of their limited length. Kay stopped what he was working on and raised his head to take a look at the stones Xiao Xuan passed on to him. Then he glimpsed at the 2 fish Xiao Xuan brought and said, "Yes, 1 fish." He meant that he could make the daggers for him and it would cost him only 1 fish. "You must keep those 2. The other one is my gift, in order to express our gratitude to your kindness for the past 6 months." Every time when Xiao Xuan collected the stones, he would bring them to Key's place and do the trading. At first Xiao Xuan was unfamiliar with all this stuff and he had brought Kay some not-so-fine stones, but still, Kay gave him food anyway. Later on Xiao Xuan knew how to identify stones of different levels, so then he recalled and realized about Key's intention to help, because how could someone deal with stones and stoneware every day and not know the difference between fine stones and normal stones? Although Kay was a man who always wore a straight face, giving others a sense of alienation, he did help Xiao Xuan a lot. What's more, Xiao Xuan had seen Ji, who was in charge of food delivery, come to visit Kay the other day, and the way they talked obviously indicated that they were pretty close to each other. So Xiao Xuan guessed that perhaps the stoneware crafter was the true reason that Ji put Xiao Xuan in charge of the orphan cave after Ku had left. Kay frowned and before he could talk, Xiao Xuan pulled out a small stone knife and handed to Kay. "Uncle Kay, please take a look at this stone knife that I myself made the other day." The stone Xiao Xuan used to make this stone knife was not of good quality. In the eyes of a stoneware craftsman, perhaps it could merely be considered as an inferior one, barely better than those stones in the gravel yard. Surely it was not difficult to polish or craft, and Xiao Xuan spent 3 days working on it. Kay took over the stone knife and looked at it as he brushed the knife with his fingers covered by stone powders. At last, he pointed at the spot about 1/3 away from the handle, and said, "This part is no good." Xiao Xuan knew that experienced stoneware crafters could tell the strengths and weaknesses with one simple glimpse. And Kay was just pointing out and informing Xiao Xuan about the biggest problem about his knife. Why should he only mention the biggest problem? Xiao Xuan was after all only a beginner when it came to stoneware crafting, and he could only rely on his imagination and thoughts. Xiao Xuan had no idea of any crafting skills that stoneware crafters held dear. So naturally the stone knife was just something with numerous flaws. So that point was only counted as the biggest problem. The more Xiao Xuan communicated with people in the tribe, the deeper understanding he got about the tribe. No one should underestimate their wisdom and ability. Xiao Xuan wanted to learn some skills in crafting and polishing stoneware from Kay by taking out that stone knife. That stone knife was only made with a knife shape, and usually Xiao Xuan could use it for normal occasions. But surely it differed a lot with the knives that hunting warriors used. In the eyes of Kay as a stoneware crafter, it was full of flaws. He could tell which part was easy to break, and which part was overpolished, and which part was not polished enough, with only one glance. Judging from Key's expression earlier when he saw the stone knife, Xiao Xuan realized that it was far from satisfaction. Basing on the fact that Xiao Xuan was merely a child with no experience in crafting stoneware, Kay made a comment on his work. If other warriors came and gave Kay such a stone knife, Kay would have just tossed it away and simply ignored it. "Uncle Kay, can I learn how to craft stoneware from you?" asked Xiao Xuan. Now, he had plenty of time and with the coming winter, he would stay inside the cave and practice on crafting stones. He got all the stone materials for himself anyway. However, unfortunately, Kay shook his head at Xiao Xuan's proposal. "Not now. After you have awakened your totemic power, then we can talk." Why should someone have the totemic power if he wanted to craft and polish a stone? What for? Regardless of the curiosity, Xiao Xuan did not continue to ask. Seeing Kay's reaction, he knew that Kay did not want to explain. Since Kay was refusing, naturally he had his reasons, but Xiao Xuan did some calculation. After this coming winter, he would be 10 years old. Based on other kids' former experiences, someone could awaken his totemic power at the age of 11 or 12. So he should wait for at least 1 or 2 years. And the slow kids like Ku would only awaken their totemic power until they turned 13 or 14 years old. So there was still a lot of time to wait, if you thought about it that way. Even if he could not learn the skills now, he could always watch. So Xiao Xuan squatted down there, watching Kay craft and polish. Bystanders would assume it was very simple, but only after they truly got started on it, could they realize that it was completely different from what they imagined before. Seeing Kay's short knife and then glimpsing at the short knife he made, only comparing could show the truth. Aside from different stone materials, one could tell which one was better based on their outlook. No wonder when Kay was looking at the stone knife Xiao Xuan made, he showed a tolerant look. Perhaps in his heart he had criticized a lot, but he kept all his criticism to himself since Xiao Xuan was only a kid. When the night fell, Xiao Xuan stopped watching and helped Kay set up a stone pot with fires underneath. Also, he chopped the fish before he took his leave, and then he returned to the cave with Caesar. Soon after Xiaoshuan left, Kay placed the completed stoneware into a box and wiped his hand, preparing to cook the food. The water in that stone pot was already boiled, and at the time when he was placing fish chops into the pot, there was a slight noise coming from the window behind. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Then there came the sound of arrows. Ah. Dong. The person coming from the window fell on the ground. Kay did not lift his head, while he stirred the soup in the stone pot with a spoon. Hey, Kay. Why did you change your tricks again? Huff, one-armed Ji rubbed his butt as he complained. Earlier he hit the ground with his butt first, so he fell? Between his feet there was a leather rope tightly strapped, or else he would not have fallen so easily from just entering through a window. He lost an arm, not a leg, so under normal circumstances, how could he fall? As he continued with his cursing, Kay continued stirring the soup in his stone pot, inattentive to Ji, who just climbed through his window and kept complaining. Ji went through some troubles untying the leather rope, and he sniffed as he approached the stone pot. Fish soup. Looking around the room, he saw the fish in the corner. Ji smiled. Has that lad come already? Kay remained silent. Ashwen traded for a big bag of salt with me yesterday, with his fish. I think he's really up to something. Today I went to the cave, and guess what? You have no idea how many fish they had stored on the top of the cave. They will have a nice winter this year, all those whelps. No wonder why you recommended Ashwen as replacement for Ku. As you predicted, not before long, the situation in that cave has changed a lot. Now half of the salt I have would go to Ashwen through trading. Ji gasped in admiration. In the mountains where the tribe was located, there was a natural formed salt pond, which provided all the salt for the tribe. However, there were strict rules about the usage of salt, and a certain amount of salt would be given to each family to meet their basic daily needs. One had to trade for more salt with his own things if he wanted more. Don't ever think about stealing, for there were warriors guarding everywhere near the salt pond. People from the mountaintop district would be in charge of the distribution of salt, so whoever wanted to trade for more salt needed to talk to the people living above. However, Ji was in charge of food, so he could save more salt than others. So Xiaoshuan would take the fish and do trading directly with Ji. Seeing that Kay remained silent, Ji found a stone stool and sat down as he kept talking himself. The day before yesterday, I saw that boy crafting and polishing a stone knife, so I suppose that he wanted your comment on that, right? That was why he came, right? Before Kay could answer, Ji continued, in fact, that lad seems to be a nice person, and he is eager to learn using his smart head. I can tell that he is always up to something, just like you. He's suitable for doing your job. Since he approached you and had enough integrity and sincerity, why not take him in as an apprentice? Ji kicked his legs in the air as he glimpsed at the chopped fish on the table. Also, he noticed the stone pot which was already set up. It was not the same way as Kay used to set up the stone pot, and obviously someone did that job for him. It was less steady, and perhaps it was also the lad's work. Kay shook his head and finally said, he will get hurt easily. Indeed. Without totemic power it would be severe if he had an accident. After all, what you've been dealing with is quite dangerous. Ji pulled out an arrow from his armpit as it was stabbed into his animal skin clothes. A few minutes before, when he entered through the window, he only paid attention to those coming arrows, but ignored the leather rope near the window frame, so he got pinned down like that. It was just a small wooden arrow and could easily be broken by a finger snap. But earlier, it stabbed into his animal skin clothes in the blink of an eye. Obviously it was at a very high speed. Ji played with the half-hand-long arrow in between his fingers for a while, and then he gently flicked his fingers, and the wooden arrow flew straight through the narrow mouth of the wooden barrel hanging in a corner. He was not sure where those small arrows come from, so he could only place them in the wooden barrel for now. Actually, the barrel was filled with things that he tossed into. When it became full, Kay would empty it and replace all the items inside properly. Kay, you will have to wait for a while? Based on the physique of the kids from that cave, you will have to wait for at least 2 more years. Sighed Ji. When Xiaoshuan came back, all the kids had already returned to the cave from the river bank. Judging from their unrestrainable smiles, they had a great harvest today. 2 groups even competed to see who pulled back more fish. Ashwen, earlier someone came to trade things with you. You weren't here, so they said they'll come by tomorrow. Udu said as he sat there, weaving a straw rope. Formerly Udu was just a timid little boy in the cave. He was relatively weak and thin. But after this period of time, he turned more cheerful than before and more communicative. Okay, I got it. Xiaoshuan nodded. Probably someone in the tribe attempted to go fishing, and perhaps they were here for Xiaoshuan after they failed for a few times and finally realized the use and importance of the black floats. At night, the moons hanging on both sides of the sky grew darker. The crescent moons were thin, and one could barely see their not-so-bright radiance. If you looked through the vent, you would find the sky filled with darkness, and only the sound of wind and flying night swallows could be heard. Winter was coming and even night swallows had lost their spirits. They created much louder sounds than before because they could not try too much to hide their tracks. A few days after that, both kids in the cave and residents in the Mountain Foot district would rush to go to the riverside before sunset. They all wanted to pull out more fish before the water froze. Perhaps in the past few years, people in the tribe had never thought about capturing those fish, so there were so many fish in the river that even many people here pulling out fish every day did not cause its quantity to drop. Those fish were extremely ferocious but were stupid at the same time. So they took the bait easily and one could get more fish every day as long as they mastered the tricks in fishing. Fortunately, the fishing went pretty well for days, and those odd creatures with long tentacles never showed up again. Until one morning, Xiaoshuan noticed that there were fewer stone worms when he took Caesar to the gravel yard. For the whole morning they only got 3 stone worms. Also, out of blue the fish seemed to disappear in the river. After they tossed the bait, they waited for a long time before they dragged out a mid-sized fish. The situation seemed to be a sign to both the kids in the cave and other people in the tribe. Xuan, why is this happening? All kids in the cave were quite upset, and they behaved like heartbroken fellows as they stared at the straw ropes in their hands. Because winter is coming, said Ned Stark, an elder kid. He had heard from others that when winter came, many game would hide itself and no one could ever find them before winter was over, and they would only show up again afterwards. Just because of that, people in the tribe were no fans of winter, for winter was full of different kinds of obstacles and that led to deep depression. Seeing that the other kids were still staring at him, Xiaoshuan sighed. Indeed, perhaps that's the reason. Because in wintertime, stone worms would not appear on the surface, as they chose to stay deep down underneath to survive the cold. Deep down in the ground, it is much warmer than on the surface. While the piranhas near riversides would also swim to the deeper section of the river and leave the shallows, because the water near the bank would freeze during wintertime. So, we can't catch stone worms and we can hardly capture any fish as well. Just as Xiaoshuan finished his words, the cave suddenly got filled with a gloomy atmosphere of depression. In the memories of many kids in the cave, winter was cold and dark. Sometimes they didn't realize that they were ill because of their drowsiness. They would just keep sleeping like whelps. When it was time for food, they would be woken up by people and got to fill something into their bellies, and then fall asleep again. They had no sense of time and they spent their lives like walking corpses. In the past that was the normal case, but compared with the days they spent on fishing and working, how could they feel the same when they recalled the dark times? Also, some kid was sitting in the corner with the fish he dragged back this afternoon, feeling distressed. As he felt sorry for himself, he touched the fish's head over and over, coveting the good times. However, it was a pretty weird picture that one little kid would just sit there, with the dead fish's wide-open red eyes and mouthful of tiny sharp teeth. If he was put in the time of peace just as Xiaoshuan's last life's world, he would totally be labeled as a psychopath, or some person with a twisted mind. But in here, that was 100% normal. Xiaoshuan wiped his face and he moved his eyesight, no longer looking at that sad boy with a fish in his arms. In fact, Xiaoshuan had aired all the hay that they used for sleeping these days. Also, he had prepared and sorted out all the animal skins and furs. So the preparation was sufficient, but it was just that no one would be able to eliminate the shadows caused by the coming winter. The past experience had caused such deep impressions in the minds of kids in the cave, so they still couldn't be optimistic. It was just noon, but it grew darker outside. Just as Xiaoshuan was making plans for winter, Ba got up from his sitting place and walked towards him. Xuan, I want to. Ba used a lot of time and efforts to make himself clear. Actually, Ba had a younger sister, and at the same time Ba was sent to the orphan cave, his younger sister got adopted by a family in the mountainside district. People in the tribe valued girls over boys, and only those families which adopted girls could get subsidy from the tribe. Most people in the tribe would have their totemic power awakened. Normally boys could awaken their totemic power at the age of 10 to 15, sooner or later. That was also the reason why all those kids, no matter in the cave or in the Mountain Foot district, dared to live a simple life filled with sleeping and eating. None of them cared about anything else, because they did not need to work hard. As long as they managed to survive from illness and starvation, they would naturally become totemic warrior when the age came. Compared to boys, fewer girls would awaken their totemic power, and nearly 1/3 of the girls could not awaken their totemic power in their whole lives. However, the tribe did not treat them badly because of that. Instead, girls were being treated far better than boys. So even being an orphan girl, she would be more easily adopted by some families. And because of the above-mentioned reason, no girl lived in the orphan cave and all kids living in there were boys. Ba wanted to visit his younger sister before winter and give her a fish as a gift. He would spare the fish from his own share, but still he came to ask for Xiao Xuan's opinion. Since Xiao Xuan showed the kids in orphan cave how to fish, he was highly respected in the cave and no one could be comparable to his position. For something that Xiao Xuan permitted to do, even those two oldest kids wouldn't come to object even when sometimes they were not quite pleased. Now, they would also consult for Xiao Xuan's opinions if they had something in mind. Ba expressed his idea with stutter and then he just stood there, rubbing his fingers with anxiety. He was worried that Xiao Xuan would refuse him so he looked at him cautiously. "Sure you can do that. Just remember to come back before night," said Xiao Xuan. "Thank you so much, Ah Xuan." Ba excitedly ran backwards and he rushed out of the cave with one fish. Seeing Ba leaving with a fish cheerfully, Xiao Xuan smiled. He did not stammer even a little when he said thank you. So it seems he needs to have some stimulation, and perhaps someday, he would be cured when he got really excited. Not long after Ba left, Moer's mother came. She had the same reason for coming, which was to take her son home, back in the mountain. However, Moer was not willing to go with her, even after she had tried every method to persuade him. Perhaps he had a huge fight with the other kids in his new family when he lived back in the mountain. In the end, Moer's mother left in tears but she left him a thick coat made from animal fur and some meat jerky. In the afternoon, when Ji was delivering food, he also brought Xiao Xuan some meat jerky, an animal skin blanket and a piece of cloth. "This is from Mai, and the clothes are from Langa," said Ji. "They are pretty busy today, because the shaman said winter would come tomorrow. Everyone is busy checking on houses and preparing stuff. So they asked me to help deliver their things to you." Mai's hunting team returned yesterday, and they hurriedly finished their last hunting mission of the year before wintertime. The harvest was good, and Xiao Xuan had seen the game they had dragged back. He was positive that the food was sufficient enough and could totally guarantee a nice winter. Let alone that many people from the hunting team had some food stored back at home, so they wouldn't suffer from starvation during winter. Yesterday, every hunting warrior that returned had a satisfying and relaxed smile on his face. Xiao Xuan took it all and had a satisfied look at them. The meat jerky was fresh and of good quality. The animal skin blanket and clothes were also far better than the animal furs and skins he traded for these days. It was impossible to say that he was not touched by this kind gesture. "Thank you, Uncle Ji. Also please kindly forward my thanks to Uncle Mai and Langa." "Oh, yes." Xiao Xuan dragged 2 fish over and asked Ji to pass them on to Mai and Langa. Even though he knew that Mai's game from the hunting mission was sufficient for him to go through the winter, he still needed to show his gratitude. Those 2 fish were from Xiao Xuan's own share, so naturally others in his group would not have a problem with it. "Hey, aren't you afraid that I will keep the fish to myself?" Ji tossed the fish into the empty stone crock and he left, with one arm carrying the stone crock. Since the shaman had predicted that tomorrow would be wintertime, Xiao Xuan passed on the words to the others in the cave. All the furs and animal skins had been distributed, and he needed to say no more. Everyone knew how to protect themselves. That night, the sky was totally dark. Up till a few days earlier, 2 crescent moons could be observed, but tonight, they disappeared. The darkness looked depressing. Xiao Xuan woke up because of the coldness in the middle of the night, and he felt as if he was lying in the snow, shaking like devils. However, he felt less cold when he woke up, which was odd. Xiao Xuan pulled away some of the straws blocking the vent after he sat up. And instantly he got chilled by the icy wind that blew in. Winter has officially come. Winter's arrival made the life in the cave return to what it was long time ago. Besides eating, they would only sleep. The temperature outside was very low, and they could not do anything anyway, so they had to go back to sleep, with an expectation that winter would be over the next time they woke up. With enough food and thicker animal skin blankets they put on, they had a comfortable sleep. At least more comfortable and relaxed than that from their memories. During wintertime, Ji came by every day delivering food as usual, regardless of the heavy blizzards outside. Xiao Xuan felt that Ji did not have to go through so much trouble. So during discussions, Xiao Xuan proposed Ji to come and deliver food every 3 days, and he would bring 3 days' food at a time. Anyways, there was less mess and chaos in the cave, and Ji knew that Xiao Xuan could keep the situation in the cave under control. So he raised no objection, and he even left Xiaoxuan a lighting stone spoon and some lighting powders, so that Xiaoxuan could make a fire on his own. However, in wintertime they did have something else to do. For example, someone would be sent here to teach them numbers and letters from the tribe. Like old times, the teacher would come here every 20 or 30 days. This winter was no exception. A certain day, it was when the teacher came by. The day before, Ji had shared the news with Xiaoxuan and let him prepare ahead, or else they would miss the precious learning opportunity just because they slept over the day. So, when the old hunter in animal skin clothes lifted the curtain while trembling and went inside the cave before he felt the warmth of the fire inside, he was very surprised to see all the kids who were supposed to be sleeping on the ground, sitting there spiritually with sparkling eyes staring at him. He lived up in the mountain, and earlier he was held up for something, so if calculated correctly, he hadn't been here in nearly 40 days, so he barely knew what had happened down here. Yesterday he had consulted Ji about the situation in the cave. At first it was routine questions, but unexpectedly things had changed a lot within recent days. When he heard that Ji appointed Xiaoxuan, a less than 10 years old boy, in charge of the cave, the old hunter was quite unpleased. He assumed that it was totally a bullying decision. Were the kids easy to deal with? In the past when he went to teach them, Xiaoxuan was the only one that paid attention. So the old hunter had a nice memory about him. He did not believe him when Ji explained, but seeing the situation in the cave for himself, he kind of believed what Ji said, and it really seemed to be different. Under 24 kids quite excited and eager eyes, the old hunter went inside with stiff strides, and sat on the stone bench he used to sit on. He took out a piece of animal skin with numbers on it, and took a look at it closely by the fire. He cleared his throat after he made sure that it was the correct roll of animal skin. Ahem. Well, today, I plan to teach you numbers and how to count from 1 to 10. Listen up closely. I will say it first. Ahem. 1, 2, 3. After he had gone through it from 1 to 10, the old hunter felt that the atmosphere turned weird. He moved his sight from the animal skin roll and looked up, only to find out that the earlier eager eyes became impatient. And some of those were even full of despise obviously. What? It was just the beginning and they were already bored. The old hunter was displeased and it reminded him of the old times when he came to teach them. They wanted to go back to sleep with endless yawns even when he just began to teach them. As he was about to yell at them, the old hunter heard a boy complaining, "So I'm listening to this crap during wintertime, and that is why I give up on my sleep. Only from 1 to 10. This old man is useless." Exactly. Hey, can you teach or not? Or is it that you can only count from 1 to 10? Xuan, perhaps we should ask the old man to leave, and let others come and teach us. Yes, I agree. Change the teacher. Change the teacher. Make him go. Xiaoxuan glimpsed at the old man holding a roll of animal skin, and he noticed that his veins were clearly throbbing on his forehead. Since he was able to come over and be responsible for the teaching, naturally he was not some idiot who only knew how to count from 1 to 10 at his age. What's more, some old hunters like himself were all experts in counting, even though they perhaps did not know much about other fields. It was because counting was one of the basic skills required for a hunting mission, and the competition among different hunting teams also required that one knew how to count. Knowing that the children in the cave could skillfully count from 1 to 30, the old hunter felt quite happy and content, aside from being surprised and shocked. He liked to teach others, but unfortunately up on the mountain, no kid needed him to teach. With this rare and precious interest, the old hunter paid extra attention in teaching and he enjoyed it as well. Since they could learn more numbers, the cave quieted down and they stopped talking about changing the teacher. Instead, every whelp was listening closely with full attention. Xiaoxuan mainly focused on the letters in the tribe while other kids were eager to learn more numbers. Caesar, who was lying on the straw bed, sleeping, was the most bored one in the cave. When it was the time for the old hunter to leave, he became quite attached to those kids already, and he felt like that he had more things that he wanted to share. In the past, he would only come here 2 or 3 times. Now that the situation had changed and he enjoyed teaching them, he planned to visit a few more times, for after all, he was not capable of getting down the mountain every day. After serious consideration, the old hunter left a roll of animal skin. Not that first one he had taken out, but a larger one with more letters and more numbers written on it. He asked Xiaoxuan to keep it, and whoever wanted to read may go to Xiaoxuan. All the vents in the cave were already blocked up by straw, so no light could come inside. During wintertime, it was the same darkness in the cave no matter day or night. Also, they could not afford to keep the fire all day long. The firewood stored in the cave was brought by the warriors, but still, they could not afford to keep the fire going all day. Xiao Xuan stared at the fire and thought that it would be much more convenient for everyone if the cave could be brighter inside. Caesar was eating a raw fish beside Xiao Xuan as he did not like cooked food. The fish teeth left after they had eaten the meat were not suitable for making other tools. They were too small. And because they were too young to go out for hunting, the fish teeth could not be used as hunting tools. But still, Xiao Xuan made a few brushes with those teeth to comb Caesar's fur and his own hair. There were combs in the tribe, but kids in the orphan cave had no interest in combing. Appearances were never as important as issues related to food. All men and women in the tribe had different hairstyles, long or short. Those with no favor of long hair may use a stone knife to cut their hair short. But no one cared to cut hair for the kids in the cave, so all of them had long messy hair. Those relatively larger fish teeth were carved up and made into necklaces by kids. They loved it. Decorations made with the game's horns or teeth or anything representative were symbols of ability. And people in the tribe liked to use that to show off their hunting gains. Some warriors would give those kind of decorations to their beloved girls to earn their favors. Girls and women in the tribe would also compare these items to see whose necklace was more advanced and whose feathers on the head was from a more ferocious bird. The fiercer the game was, the more admiration one would receive by putting on decorations made from it. Of course, kids would also compare themselves with others. In the Mountainfoot district, most kids were wearing necklaces that were made from the horns, teeth, or bones of their parents' game. In the cave, however, many orphans lost their parents at a very young age, so no one would give them such decorations as gifts. Every time when they went to the tribe and saw those kids with decorations, they would very much admire or even envy them. It was also the hidden reason for most fights between them and the other kids in the tribe. But now, they could use their own game's teeth to make their own unique necklaces. How could they not be happy? Now they also had necklaces, which were no worse than the other kids. Fish teeth necklaces were another reason why those kids were so fond of fish. Xiao Xuan did not strive for fish teeth with the others, and he spared all those big fish teeth, which were suitable to make necklaces, to other kids. When Ba was visiting his younger sister, he gave her a big fish tooth, even bigger than the ones he was wearing himself. Life was not easy on anyone. As Xiao Xuan was considering how to better the situation in the cave, other kids were far less troubled. Aside from sleeping every day, they would only communicate about counting numbers by the fire with other kids when it was time to eat. While Mower sharpened his knife every day. He had already mastered counting, and he had known more letters than the others in the cave. So every time when the fire was lit, he would stay in a corner and practice his knifing skills. He would toss a rock into the air, and then use his knife to chop at it, since in the cave there were no night swallows for him to practice. After eating, all the kids in the cave fell asleep. Before the wood in the bonfire burnt out, Xiao Xuan added another stick in until the end of the stick caught on fire, taking the burning stick as a torch and walked deeper into the cave. The other day when he was checking out the depth of the cave, he found a stone room that stored sundries. The stone pots that the kids used to make breakfast just came from there after Xiao Xuan dug them out. Besides stone pots, Xiao Xuan did not pay attention to other items. Anyway, he had nothing else to do, so he carried the stick there to see if he could find any other useful things. Even though they had blocked all vents where they slept, down the cave there were still cracks connecting to the outside. So Xiao Xuan could feel icy breezes blowing in as he kept walking inside. The good thing was that the wind was not strong and the flame merely flickered a few times and was not blown out. Xiao Xuan tightened his animal skin clothes and followed his memories inside. Caesar followed him closely. There were many stone rooms inside, and they were distributed like branches. The first room from the right had sundries in it, and was quite big. The vent in the stone room was also blocked, and Xiao Xuan took the torch to go through the stuff inside. Some items were used before, but perhaps the kids in the cave no longer cared to use them and only waited for the tribe to deliver food, so none of the tools were used again and they could only gather dust there. Aside from some stone stools and things to set up stone pots, Xiao Xuan had no interest in the other items. After some time, Xiao Xuan fixed his eyes on the round stone plate. It was a round stone plate, quite flat, with an edge about 1 finger above the bottom. To hold food to eat. But who would use this thing since they had a stone pot? He put the stone plate aside and kept on looking for other items. As he kept digging, he hesitated for a minute and looked back at the stone plate that he tossed to the side. He measured roughly with his hand and then raised the torch high to see the vent. All the vents in the cave were not small, so air and light could both come inside. Xiao Xuan's sight moved back and forth between the blocked vent and the stone plate, and then he took the stone plate as he returned along the way he came. Xiao Xuan added some more firewood to make the fire grow, and got some snow from the thick layer of snow at the entrance. He placed the snow inside a stone pot, and placed the stone plate outside the straw curtain by the cave's entrance. After some time, he poured the melted snow water inside the stone plate, and after not long, he found the water had frozen. So he dragged the stone plate inside, and burned on the edge of the stone plate with fire, before he put the stone plate upside down and pulled out the round ice. Some kids who weren't asleep yet were staring at Xiaoshuan's efforts curiously. They wondered what he was doing, but wrapped with thick animal skin blankets, they did not want to stand up because of the cold, yet could only try to crane their necks to get a clearer view. However, the fire was not strong enough for them to see clearly. It was too cold to touch with bare hands, so Xiaoshuan used a piece of animal skin to wrap the ice, and he stepped on a rock, holding the ice. He told Ba to clear out all the straw that were blocking the vent. With no stuffing, icy winds blew into the cave, and kids inside got chilled because of the cold. Xiaoshuan, who was standing right under the vent, got an intense strike and he could not even feel his own face. So he hurriedly pushed the ice towards the vent, with the help of Ba. As Xiaoshuan had predicted earlier, the ice was almost the same size as the vent, only smaller. And that difference allowed him to push the ice into that vent. In the past, Xiaoshuan did not understand why there was a dent at the edge of the vent. Now he understood that it was used to block the ice. As for the other small crevices, they could be blocked by straw directly. By the time the ice was stuck, no icy winds could blow in but light poured down through the ice. During winter there was no shining sunshine, but daylight was not gone. In Xiaoshuan's perspective, he was not satisfied with that little light, and the design was not flawless. But for those kids in the cave, they were more than satisfied. All of them kept their mouths wide open as they stared at the sparkling vent, like mindless fools. It turned out that winter could also be bright. Xiaoshuan had only completed the refitting of one vent, and the other kids volunteered to finish the others. This time there were plenty of volunteers. Those who cared not to get up earlier, now gathered together with animal skin blankets. Xiaoshuan guided them to make an ice plate and installed it into one vent, then he let them continue working by themselves. Every kid wanted to try with their own hands, but Xiaoshuan decided that they should also do the job as a 5-member group. They used a human pyramid to get to those really high places. Xiaoshuan told them to be careful when they used the stone plate, for no one knew how long it had been stored here. At least in recent years, it had never been used. Seeing that there should be no problem, Xiaoshuan carried his torch and went back to the stone room full of sundries. He dug out another 4 stone plates, but 3 were broken and only 1 could be used. He took the second stone plate out and made an ice bulk that blocked the vent in the sundry stone room. He could now lose his torch, yet still see the situation inside. While the kids were busy making ice plates, Xiaoshuan stayed there to keep digging for other items that they could use. As he was digging, Xiaoshuan's arm swiped past the stone walls and he noticed that stone powders fell from it. Xiaoshuan was quite curious, for other stone walls in the cave were not like that. He bent and observed closely, and then found out that it seemed that on the stone walls in the stone room, there was a layer. It seemed to be painted with special stone powders. He had seen people in the tribe use similar ways to paint wood to prevent the wood from being infected by insects. But it was in the cave, why would anyone use this method to paint a stone wall? And, judging by the situation, it was painted years ago in ancient times. If newly painted, the powder should cover the wall fully and tightly. However, now since it had been a long time since everyone in the tribe lived here, the layer of stone powder came loose and in some places, the layer fell hard if one swiped it with his hand. Xiaoshuan took out his stone knife and scratched on the wall to remove the stone powder layer. With the light coming through the vent, Xiaoshuan saw that there were some pictures carved on the wall where there was no layer. A woman was carrying a pot. The pot had a wide mouth and tight bottom. On the pot there were also some decorative patterns. Xiaoshuan had never seen anyone in the tribe using this kind of a stone pot, for all the people in the tribe valued practical usage instead of beautiful appearances when it came to tools. Perhaps those living up in the mountain might have those kind of pots in their homes, Xiaoshuan thought. When he wiped out another part on the stone wall, there were about 10 warriors, chasing game with bows and arrows. Xiaoshuan remembered that Lang Ga had told him that few warriors in the tribe were able to use a bow. Because no materials were fine enough to be made into a bow that could bear the strength of a totemic warrior. The bow and arrows now were made to set up a trap or help the hunting by driving away the game, instead of for totemic warriors' use. However, in the picture on the wall, every warrior was holding a giant bow. Xiaoshuan intended to use his knife and scratch more stone powder down, to see other carved paintings on the wall. But after some thought, he dropped the knife, fetched some water, and carefully used a piece of animal skin to wipe the wall. He believed that the frescoes on the stone wall inside the stone room might tell him a lot of interesting things that he had no clue of before. Like and subscribe.